and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together. About a week before we all graduated from high school, one of my friends decided to have a party and bonfire at the top of an old quarry near his house. Calling it a quarry is not completely accurate. There was no water at the bottom, so it was more like a massive empty pit with a high cliff surrounding most of it. From below, the rock walls formed almost 3/4 of a circle, like a giant stone bowl carved into the land. The place was surrounded by thick woods. It was far enough from the nearest houses that we could play music and have a fire without bothering many people. Teenagers from the area occasionally went there to hang out, but reaching it required some effort. My friend's house was about a mile from the entrance to the woods. From there, you had to walk along a trail for another 10 minutes before reaching the bottom of the quarry. Once you arrived, a steep, rocky path followed the left rim of the bowl and eventually climbed to the top of the cliff. It was not an official trail. There were loose stones, uneven ground, and areas where slipping could have been dangerous. To the right of the climbing path was the open quarry and the drop below. To the left was dense forest. That evening, everyone met at my friend's house at around 7. We gathered supplies, talked about what we were bringing, and prepared to leave together. The plan was to walk through the woods as a group before the sun went down completely. Just as everyone was about to go, a woman I was seeing at the time said she needed to get home. I was her ride. I did not want to make the entire group wait for me, so I told them to continue without me. I knew the route well enough and planned to meet them at the quarry. They left while I drove her home. By the time I returned to my friend's house, it was around 7:45. The others had already been gone for a while. I knew the sun would be setting soon, so I did not waste any time. I left my vehicle near the house and started toward the woods. I was wearing jeans and flip-flops, which were not ideal for running a mile or climbing a rocky trail. I had not expected to make the journey alone, and I had dressed for sitting beside a fire rather than hiking. Still, I wanted to reach everyone before it became completely dark. I ran most of the distance from the house to the woods. The flip-flops slapped against my feet, and the jeans made the run uncomfortable. But I kept moving. By the time I reached the trail entrance, I was already breathing heavily. The entrance to the woods looked darker than the open road behind me. There was still some light in the sky, but the trees blocked much of it. The moment I stepped beneath them, evening seemed to arrive faster. I began walking along the trail. I could not run properly because of the roots, rocks, and poor footwear. The trail was familiar, but it required attention even during the day. I moved as quickly as I safely could. The farther I went, the quieter everything became. I could hear insects and the sound of my own steps. Occasionally, a bird or a small animal moved in the brush. Nothing seemed threatening. I was not afraid of the woods, and I knew my friends were somewhere ahead. After about 10 minutes, I reached the bottom of the quarry. The trees opened, and the huge cliff became visible in front of me. There was only a small amount of daylight left, but I could see the shape of the rock walls surrounding the empty center. At the top, I noticed the glow of the fire. My friends had already started it. I could hear music playing faintly above me, the sound weakened by the distance and the shape of the quarry. Seeing the fire made me feel relieved. I had reached the location before complete darkness, and the others were close. All I needed to do was climb the path. The route to the top began along the left side of the quarry. It followed the rim upward, gradually becoming steeper and rockier. I started climbing. The path was only about 4 or 5 feet wide in most places. To my right was the quarry wall, an open drop. To my left was a dense section of forest that seemed to begin immediately beside the trail. The trees were thick enough that I could not see more than a short distance between them. As the remaining daylight faded, the woods became almost completely black. I concentrated on my footing. Loose rocks shifted beneath my flip-flops, and I occasionally had to use my hands to steady myself. I could still hear the music above, which helped guide me. The firelight appeared brighter as I climbed. I knew I was getting close. About 3/4 of the way up, I reached a smaller path branching to the right. This side path led toward the cliff edge, where someone could look over the quarry. In the dim light, I mistook it for the route to the top. The main trail continued upward. But from where I stood, the turn looked as though it might lead more directly toward my friends. I followed it. The smaller path was narrower and moved out toward the open rock. After walking a short distance, I realized it did not continue to the party. It ended at an overlook. From there, I could see my friends above me. The fire burned near the top, and I could make out several people gathered around it. I called to them. I wanted them to know I had arrived and also hoped someone might point out the correct route. They may have heard me, but the music and distance made communication difficult. I turned around and began walking back toward the main path. Nothing had frightened me yet. I was only mildly annoyed with myself for taking the wrong turn. When I returned to the junction, I stepped back onto the main trail. Then I looked downhill in the direction I had come from. About 10 feet below me, something ran across the path. It moved from the quarry side on my right directly into the dense woods on my left. The entire sight lasted perhaps a second. It was tall. It moved on 2 legs. Beyond that, I could only describe it as a blur. It crossed the 4 or 5 foot wide path with incredible speed and disappeared into the trees. I froze. My mind could not immediately understand what I had seen. It was not low to the ground like a deer, dog, or coyote. The shape rose vertically. It had the height and general form of a person, but it moved too quickly for me to identify any clear features. I did not see a face. I did not recognize clothing. I could not tell whether it had hair, fur, or bare skin. There was only the impression of a tall, 2-legged figure moving across the trail. The strange part was where it came from. On the right side of the path was the quarry. There was no normal route from that direction that I knew of. The figure seemed to appear from the rocky side below the trail, cross directly behind where I had just been standing, and enter the forest. For it to have been there, it must have either climbed up from the quarry or waited near the edge of the path. I had been walking alone below it only moments earlier. The thought struck me immediately. Whatever it was may have been watching me climb. I stood at the junction, staring into the woods where it had disappeared. The trees were completely still. I listened for branches breaking or footsteps moving through the leaves. There was nothing. That silence made the sighting feel even less natural. A large person running into dense forest should have made noise. Branches should have snapped. Dry leaves should have moved. An animal of that size should have disturbed the undergrowth. I heard none of it. I called out. Is someone there? My voice sounded small against the quarry and trees. No one answered. I called again, louder. Nothing. The music continued faintly from above, but the forest beside me remained silent. For a few seconds, I considered walking toward the place where the figure entered. Curiosity told me to check. Maybe one of my friends had come down to scare me. Perhaps someone from the party had seen me take the wrong path and hidden below the trail. It would have been the kind of stupid prank teenagers might attempt. But the figure had moved too quickly, and there was something about its shape that stopped me from following. It did not feel like a friend running away after a joke. The fear that came over me was immediate and physical. I had never felt anything like it before. My chest tightened. My arms and legs seemed to become cold. Every instinct told me to get away from the woods. I turned and ran toward the top of the quarry. The path was steep and covered with loose rock, but I no longer cared about falling. I climbed as quickly as possible in the flip-flops, using my hands when I needed to. I expected something to come out of the forest behind me. I imagined the figure returning to the path and following. I did not look back. The firelight grew brighter. The music became louder. Then I reached the top and saw my friends. The sight of other people brought immediate relief, but I was still panicked. I went directly to them and told them what had happened. I described the figure running across the trail below me and disappearing into the woods. My friends reacted with a mixture of concern and disbelief. Some thought I was joking. Others suggested it had been an animal. The first thing I did was check who was present. I counted everyone and asked whether anyone had gone down the trail. All of my friends were at the top. No one admitted leaving the party to scare me. No one was missing. They had arrived together, started the fire, and remained nearby. It was still possible one of them was lying, but the timing would have been difficult. For someone from the group to create the sighting, they would have needed to leave the top without being noticed, climb down a dangerous section near the quarry, cross the trail below me, enter the forest, and somehow return to the party before I arrived. I had run the final part of the trail immediately after seeing the figure. There was not enough time for someone to circle around and beat me to the top. I also would have heard them moving through the woods. After checking everyone, I looked back toward the trail. From the top, I could see only a small portion of the path before it disappeared among the rocks and trees. Nothing followed me. The fire and people made the area feel safer, but I could not relax. I kept looking toward the forest. Every movement between the trees made me think the figure was standing there. My friends asked what it looked like. I had difficulty answering. It was tall and moved on two legs. Those were the only details I trusted. Calling it a blur did not mean it was transparent or supernatural. It was simply moving so quickly in poor light that I could not focus on it. It may have been wearing dark clothes. It may have had fur. I do not know. Some friends suggested a deer. A deer can rise tall when seen from the side, and its quick movement may look almost upright for a moment. But I had seen deer before. They run on four legs and have a recognizable shape. This figure moved like a person. Its upper body remained high as it crossed the path. A bear was another possibility. Bears can stand and move briefly on two legs, although they usually drop to all fours when running. A bear crossing the trail would also have seemed wide and heavy, not like the narrow blur I remembered. The area was not known for frequent bear sightings, but one could still have been present. Maybe the darkness distorted its posture. Maybe I saw only part of its body between the rocks and trees. A human being was the most obvious explanation. Someone may have been wandering through the quarry or woods. It could have been another teenager who knew about the party and wanted to frighten us. It might have been a homeless person, hunter or trespasser who did not want to be seen. That possibility should have made me feel better because it was normal. Instead, it frightened me even more. If the figure was a person, then someone had been alone in the woods beside the path while I climbed. He had not called out. He had not asked to join the party. He had remained hidden until I turned away. Maybe he had followed me from the entrance. Perhaps he watched me take the side path and believed I could no longer see the main trail. Then, when I returned unexpectedly, I caught him crossing behind me. That idea still bothers me. A person hiding in the woods could have intentions far more dangerous than an unknown animal. I stayed at the party, but the rest of the night felt different. The quarry no longer seemed like an empty place where only our group was present. The dark forest beside the fire felt occupied. I tried to enjoy myself, but I remained aware of the path and tree line. When someone went to get more wood or stepped away from the group, I watched until they returned. I did not want anyone walking alone. Eventually, we all left together. I made sure I was not the last person on the trail. The walk back through the woods felt longer than the journey in. We had flashlights and several people, but I kept looking toward the places where the beams ended. Nothing appeared. No one followed us. The figure did not show itself again. In the days afterward, I kept replaying the sighting. The sequence was simple. I climbed the main path. I mistakenly turned onto the overlook. I called to my friends. I returned to the junction. Then something crossed the trail 10 feet below me. If I had stayed on the main path instead of taking the wrong turn, our paths might have crossed directly. I may have reached that exact spot at the same moment the figure came from the quarry side. The thought made my mistake feel strangely fortunate. By taking the overlook path, I had delayed myself. Whatever crossed the trail passed below instead of meeting me face to face. I have returned to the quarry since then. I have gone during the day and at night. Part of me hoped to find a normal explanation. I studied the path where the figure had appeared. I looked at the rocks on the quarry side and the forest on the left. In daylight, the area seemed less mysterious. The trail was narrow but visible. The rocky slope could potentially be climbed, although it would not be easy. An athletic person might have reached the path from below. Animals could also move through the area. The dense woods contained game trails and gaps that were difficult to notice in darkness. During later visits, I found nothing unusual. No strange tracks, no hidden shelter, no evidence that someone lived in the woods. Nothing crossed the path. That should have helped me dismiss the experience. It did not. The fact that I never saw it again left me with no way to compare or investigate. I only had the original moment. Over time, I considered whether exhaustion affected me. I had driven someone home, returned, run nearly a mile in flip-flops and jeans, then walked through the woods and climbed a rocky trail. I was tired and breathing hard. The light was fading. Maybe a shadow moved across the path, and my brain turned it into a tall figure. The quarry walls and trees could have created strange visual effects. A bird, branch, or small animal moving close to me might have seemed much larger. Peripheral vision is unreliable, especially at dusk. That is a reasonable explanation. But I looked directly down the path. The figure was not only at the edge of my vision. I saw it cross the full width of the trail. It began on the quarry side and disappeared into the forest. Its movement had a clear direction and shape. I also heard no corresponding sound. Perhaps that silence came from shock. The music above, my own breathing, and the acoustics of the quarry may have covered the noise. I might have been too frightened to process what I heard. Memory often preserves visual details while losing sound. Still, I remember waiting and listening after it vanished. The forest gave me nothing. Another explanation is that one of my friends did prank me and never admitted it. Teenagers can be committed to a joke, especially when someone reacts strongly. Maybe a friend climbed down earlier and hid near the trail. After running into the woods, he used another route to return to the top. If the terrain allowed a shortcut I did not know about, it could have been possible. But I checked everyone almost immediately. They were all there and did not appear tired from running through dense forest. No one laughed in the way people do when hiding a successful prank. Several seemed genuinely concerned. Years later, nobody confessed. I also knew most of them well enough to recognize their size and movement. The figure seemed taller than my friend's. It did not move like someone I knew. It may have been a stranger. The quarry was not private property in the strictest sense, and other people could access it. Someone may have heard the music and approached the party. When he saw me alone, he hid. Perhaps he was embarrassed or afraid of being confronted. Maybe he ran into the forest to avoid us. That explanation accounts for the human shape and silence. It also creates the most disturbing question. How long had he been there? The path from the woods entrance to the quarry took about 10 minutes. I had walked it alone while the light faded. If the stranger was moving in the same direction, he could have followed me the entire way. I would not have heard him if he stayed far enough behind. Once I began climbing, he might have moved along the lower quarry edge. When I turned onto the overlook, he attempted to cross the trail unseen. I returned too soon and caught him. If that is what happened, I am glad I ran. I do not know what he wanted. There is also the possibility that it was an animal I simply failed to identify. That is probably the most likely answer. The world contains strange-looking animals, especially when they are sick, injured, or seen under poor lighting. A deer moving uphill could appear upright. A large dog jumping across the path might briefly show only its rear legs and torso. A bear could rise as it climbed. The two-legged appearance may have lasted less than a second. My mind could have completed the rest. Yet the fear I experienced did not feel like confusion over an animal. It felt like recognition without understanding. I saw something shaped like a person, but some part of me believed it was not one. That instinct is difficult to explain scientifically. Fear does not prove anything supernatural. The body can react strongly to ordinary threats. In fact, a hidden human being may create a stronger instinctive response than a wild animal because human movement is familiar enough for us to notice when something is wrong. Maybe I saw a person running with an unusual posture. The speed, darkness, and silence made him seem inhuman. I have wondered what would frighten me more if I learned the truth. If it was some unknown creature, then something moved through those woods that I cannot name. It was tall, fast, and comfortable near the edge of a quarry after dark. I had been alone in its territory. If it was a person, then a stranger may have followed me through the forest and hidden beside the path. He could have attacked me without anyone seeing. My friends were close enough for me to hear their music, but they would not have known I was in danger until it was too late. The supernatural explanation is frightening because it changes what I believe can exist. The human explanation is frightening because it is completely possible. Sometimes I think the figure had been standing near the quarry side of the path, waiting for me to pass. Maybe it was not running away from me. Maybe it was changing position. It could have crossed into the woods so it could follow from cover. That thought came to me later and made the memory worse. At the time, I assumed it disappeared because it was frightened or did not want to be seen. But I never saw which direction it traveled after entering the forest. The woods ran beside the path all the way toward the top. It could have moved parallel to me while I climbed. It may have been only a few yards away when I reached my friends. There is no evidence that happened. Nothing else appeared, and nobody was harmed. But the possibility remains. The event has become one of those experiences I revisit whenever people discuss strange encounters in the woods. I describe what I saw honestly. A tall, two-legged blur crossed a narrow path 10 feet below me at dusk. I did not see a face. I did not hear a voice. I cannot prove it was anything unusual. I only know the fear was unlike anything I had felt before. It was not the ordinary fear of being alone in the dark. It was the feeling that something had been close to me without my knowledge. The quarry amplified that feeling. The cliff on one side and the dense trees on the other left very few places to escape. The path was narrow. Whatever crossed it had moved between two environments that were both dangerous for me to follow. If it went toward the quarry, I risked falling. If it went into the forest, I would lose sight of it immediately. The figures seemed to understand the land better than I did. I returned several times because curiosity remained stronger than fear once daylight came. I wanted to see it again under conditions that would allow me to identify it. I never did. The quarry was always empty except for normal wildlife and other visitors. The path remained only a path. No trace marked the place where the figure crossed. Years have passed, and I still picture the same moment. I'm standing at the junction after returning from the overlook. The last light is fading above the quarry. My friend's fire glows at the top. Music reaches me faintly. I look down the path. 10 feet away, something tall runs from the open rock into the trees. It crosses so quickly that my mind cannot catch its shape. Then the forest is still. I call out. No one answers. I run to the top and find every one of my friends already there. I wish I knew what I saw. A deer, bear, stranger, or shadow would all be easier to accept if I had evidence. Instead, I am left with the movement, the silence, and the fear. I still cannot decide which possibility is worse. Maybe something unknown lived near that quarry and watched me climb alone. Or maybe it was only a person hiding in the woods, following me in the dark. I was 16 years old when this happened. And more than 15 years later, I still have no explanation for it. It was late at night, just before bed. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth, following the same routine I followed every evening. The flat was quiet. My parents were somewhere else inside, and my brother and I shared a bedroom at the opposite end of a long corridor. The bathroom door opened directly into that corridor, so anyone standing outside it would have been only a few feet away from me. The lights were on. There were no dark rooms, strange shadows, or poor visibility that could have caused confusion. I was standing in front of the sink, looking into the mirror and brushing my teeth, when I heard my brother outside the bathroom door. He spoke in a loud whisper. "Vicorge, quick, come here." I recognized his voice immediately. There was nothing uncertain about it. It did not sound similar to my brother or vaguely like him. It was his voice, using the same tone and way of speaking he always used. He sounded urgent. I assumed he wanted to show me something before our parents noticed, or perhaps he had found something funny and did not want to shout through the flat. Because I was still brushing my teeth, I told him to wait. I expected him to either leave or explain what he wanted. Instead, he repeated himself. "Vicorge, quick, come here." He was still whispering loudly, and he still sounded as though he were directly outside the bathroom door. I became slightly annoyed. Whatever he wanted could wait a few seconds. I had toothpaste in my mouth, and I was almost finished. I told him to wait again. There was a brief pause. Then the voice came for a third time. "Vicorge, quick, come here." The words were exactly the same. The tone was urgent but controlled, as though he did not want anyone else to hear him. By that point, I was irritated. My brother knew I was in the bathroom. He knew I could not answer properly while brushing my teeth. The fact that he continued repeating the same sentence felt childish and impatient. I finished as quickly as I could, rinsed my mouth, and opened the door. I opened it almost immediately after the third whisper. There was no one outside. The corridor was empty. At first, I did not feel afraid. I assumed my brother had run away to annoy me. That seemed like the obvious explanation. He had called me 3 times and then disappeared just before I opened the door, probably expecting me to follow him. I stepped into the corridor. I looked in both directions. There was nowhere nearby for him to hide. The corridor was long and straight, with the bathroom at one end and our bedroom at the other. The lights were on, so I could see the entire distance clearly. I should have seen him running away. I should have heard his footsteps. The floors were not silent. Anyone moving quickly through the flat would have made noise, especially at night when everything else was quiet. But I had heard nothing. I was still more angry than frightened. I thought he had somehow slipped away without me noticing. I stormed down the corridor toward our bedroom. As I walked, I called out loudly, "What?" There was no answer. I reached the bedroom and entered. My brother was in bed. He was tucked under the blankets up to his chin. Headphones covered his ears, and music was playing loudly enough that he had not heard me approach. He looked completely relaxed. He was not out of breath. He was not trying to hide a smile. He did not look like someone who had just run the full length of the corridor and jumped beneath the covers. I stood in the doorway, still expecting him to admit he had been joking. He noticed me, pulled off his headphones, sat up, and looked confused. "What?" he asked, the same word I had just shouted at him. His reaction stopped me. I asked what he had wanted. He stared at me as though he had no idea what I was talking about. I told him that he had been outside the bathroom door calling me. He denied it immediately. He said he had been in bed listening to music. I thought he was lying. That was the only explanation that made sense. I accused him of trying to scare me. He continued looking confused. I asked again whether it was a joke. He shook his head. That was when the fear began. My brother has never been good at lying. When he tries to hide something, it shows immediately. He changes his expression, avoids eye contact, or starts laughing. He is also sensitive. If he had been playing a joke and then saw how frightened I was becoming, he would have admitted it. He would not have continued pretending after realizing I was genuinely upset. But he did not look guilty. He looked concerned. I felt all the warmth leave my body. The blood seemed to drain from my face, and a cold feeling moved through me from my chest outward. I started crying. My reaction frightened my brother, too. He sat up fully and asked what had happened. I tried to explain that I had heard him clearly, not once, 3 times. The voice had been directly outside the bathroom door. It had called my name. It had told me to come quickly. He kept saying he had never left the bed. The more he denied it, the worse I felt. If it was not him, then I did not know who had spoken to me. There were other people inside the flat, but the voice did not belong to my parents. It belonged to my brother. The sound, rhythm, and pronunciation were exactly right. I had lived with him my entire life. I knew his whisper. I knew the way he said my name. I knew the specific tone he used when he wanted my attention without alerting our parents. Whatever stood outside that bathroom door had copied him perfectly. My parents eventually became involved because I was crying and visibly shaken. I told them what happened. They tried to calm me and offered normal explanations. Maybe I had imagined the voice. Maybe I had heard my brother speaking from the bedroom, and the sound traveled down the corridor. Perhaps the television or another device made a noise that resembled words. Maybe I was tired, and my brain created the voice. Those explanations did not fit. My brother had been listening to music through headphones. He had not called for me from the bedroom. Even if he had, his voice would have sounded distant. What I heard was close. The whisper seemed to come from the other side of a thin bathroom door. There was no echo or distortion. It was as though his face was only inches from the wood. The repeated sentence made it harder to dismiss as random noise. A pipe can make a sound that briefly resembles a word. Music from another room can create the impression that someone said your name. But I heard a complete sentence. "Vicorch, quick, come here." Then I heard it again. Then a third time. Each repetition was clear. Each sounded like my brother. I had even responded between them. The voice seemed to react to the fact that I was not coming. When I told it to wait, it called again. That interaction made it feel real. I was not lying in bed, half asleep. I was standing upright, brushing my teeth. I was awake enough to become annoyed, answer several times, rinse my mouth, and open the door. There was no transition between sleep and waking, no missing time, no dreamlike changes in the flat. Everything happened in a normal sequence. That is why the experience stayed with me. If it had happened while I was falling asleep, I could blame a dream. If I had heard the voice only once, I could blame the pipes or music. If my brother had been standing in the corridor laughing when I opened the door, it would have been an ordinary prank. Instead, the hallway was empty, and my brother was already in bed. The timing was impossible. I opened the door only seconds after the final whisper. For my brother to have created the voice, he would have needed to run down the full corridor, enter our bedroom, climb into bed, pull the blankets up to his chin, place the headphones over his ears, start the music, and make himself appear completely relaxed. He would have needed to do all of that without me hearing him. The corridor was long. The lights were on. I stepped outside almost immediately. There was no hidden doorway he could have used, no shortcut, no place where he could have waited until I passed. It could not have happened. I have replayed the sequence many times. Maybe more time passed between the whisper and opening the door than I remember. Fear can distort time. What felt like 2 seconds might have been 20, but even 20 seconds would have been difficult. I was angry and trying to confront him. I did not stand in the bathroom thinking for a long time. I rinsed quickly and opened the door, and I should still have heard him running. Maybe he had never been outside the bathroom. Perhaps the sound traveled from the bedroom in an unusual way. Buildings can create strange acoustics. Pipes, vents, and hallways can make voices seem closer or come from the wrong direction. My brother might have called me earlier and forgotten, but he had headphones on and was surprised to see me. He also denied speaking at all. His voice would have needed to travel from the bedroom, down the long corridor, and somehow sound as if it were directly against the bathroom door. It would also need to remain loud enough for me to understand every word. That seems unlikely. My parents believed I imagined it. I understand why. There was no person in the hallway. My brother denied speaking. Nothing else unusual happened that night. The easiest explanation was that my mind created the voice. Auditory hallucinations can happen to healthy people. Stress, tiredness, anxiety, and lack of sleep can cause someone to hear a familiar voice briefly. People sometimes hear their name called when nobody is there. The brain is especially good at recognizing voices we know well. Perhaps I heard a combination of normal household sounds, and my mind turned them into my brother's whisper. But it happened 3 times. The words remained the same. The voice sounded urgent and intentional. I responded, and it repeated itself. I was not particularly tired or stressed, at least not that I remember. I was only brushing my teeth before bed. There was no reason for my mind to create such a specific interaction. Another explanation is that my brother played the joke and has continued lying for more than 15 years. I have asked him about it many times. He always gives the same answer. He was in bed. He had his headphones on. He never called me from the hallway. His reaction has never changed. Even now, when we are adults and there would be no reason to maintain the joke, he swears it was not him. If he admitted it today, I would probably feel relieved. I might be angry that he allowed me to remain frightened for so long, but at least I would have an explanation. He has nothing to gain by continuing the lie. He knows how much the memory affected me. He still denies it. That leaves me with a question I do not like asking. What was outside the bathroom? I did not see anyone. I only heard the voice. Maybe there was never a physical figure in the corridor. Perhaps whatever caused the sound did not need a body. The thought sounds supernatural, and I do not claim to know that is what happened. But if something wanted me to open the door, it used the perfect voice. It sounded like the person I trusted most in the flat. It did not whisper something threatening. It told me to come quickly. That urgency was designed to make me act before thinking. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had opened the door the first time. The voice called 3 times because I kept telling it to wait. Maybe it expected me to follow immediately. If I had stepped into the hallway after the first whisper, would I have seen anything? Would there have been someone standing there? Would the corridor still have been empty? The fact that it asked me to come here bothers me. It did not call for help. It did not explain what was wrong. It only wanted me to leave the bathroom and enter the corridor. Perhaps there was no intention behind it. Maybe the sentence came from my own mind because it was something my brother might normally say. Still, it feels like an invitation. There are stories from many cultures about voices copying family members. People describe hearing a parent call from another room when that parent is not home. Some hear their child crying from outside the house while the child is asleep beside them. Others hear their own voice repeated from a dark area. I did not know those stories at the time. I learned about them much later. Hearing them did not prove anything, but they made my experience feel less isolated. The details are often similar. The voice is familiar. It calls from a place the listener cannot immediately see. It asks the person to come closer. When the listener checks, no one is there. Some people call these mimics. Others believe the experiences are caused by memory, acoustics, or the brain misinterpreting sound. I do not know which explanation is correct. I only know that the voice outside the bathroom copied my brother perfectly. For a long time afterward, I became nervous when someone called me from another room. I would answer first and wait for a response. Sometimes I checked where the person was before following the voice. If my brother called me, I wanted to see him. I did not trust the voice by itself anymore. The bathroom also felt different after that night. Every time I brushed my teeth before bed, I remembered the whisper. I would look at the door and wonder whether I might hear it again. I sometimes kept the door open so I could see the corridor. Other times, I locked it, although a lock would not have protected me from a voice with no visible source. Nothing similar ever happened again. I did not hear my brother call from an empty room. No one whispered outside the bathroom door. There were no footsteps or figures in the corridor. It was one isolated event. That makes it easier to dismiss, but harder to investigate. If it happened repeatedly, I could record the hallway or check the acoustics. I could compare the sound with my brother's real voice, but it happened once, late at night, and left no evidence. All I have is memory. Memory can change. More than 15 years have passed. Perhaps the corridor was shorter than I remember. Maybe the door was open longer. Perhaps my brother's headphones were not on when I first entered the bedroom. Small details can shift over time. But the central moment has never changed. I heard him outside the bathroom. He called my name 3 times. I opened the door. No one was there. I found him in bed with music playing. He had no idea why I was asking what he wanted. My emotional reaction also remains clear. I did not become frightened while inside the bathroom. I became annoyed. That matters because I was not already expecting something supernatural. I did not interpret the voice as a ghost or intruder. I believed it was my brother. The fear only came after I saw him in bed and realized the timeline did not make sense. My body reacted before I could create an explanation. I went cold. I began crying. I knew immediately that something was wrong. My brother's confusion frightened me more than any prank could have. If he had laughed, the whole event would have ended. Instead, he looked at me as though I was the one behaving strangely. To him, I'd suddenly entered the bedroom shouting, "What?" while he listened to music. He had no memory of calling me. From his perspective, nothing unusual had happened until I appeared. That difference between our experiences remains unsettling. I heard a full interaction. He experienced none of it. It was as though the voice existed only for me. Maybe that is exactly what happened. An auditory hallucination would be private. My brain could have produced my brother's voice without him hearing anything. The fact that the voice used my name and a familiar sentence would make sense because the mind builds hallucinations from known information. That is the explanation I try to accept. It is reasonable. It does not require anything supernatural. But even that explanation is disturbing. If my own mind created the voice, it did so perfectly enough to make me argue with it. I trusted it completely. I believed a person stood only inches away. That means our senses can create experiences that feel as real as anything outside us. There is no way to protect yourself from a sound when it comes from your own brain. Still, I cannot fully believe it was imaginary. The voice had position. I could tell exactly where it came from. It was not inside my head or distant in the flat. It was outside the door, at the height where my brother's mouth would have been. The volume was controlled, like someone trying to whisper loudly enough for me to hear without waking others. It sounded physical. It sounded present. My brother remains skeptical, but he does not accuse me of lying. He knows I believed what I heard. When the story comes up, he repeats that he was in bed and never left the room. He remembers my face and the way I started crying. That is his evidence that something frightened me, even if he does not believe the voice was real. My parents still think I imagined it. They may be right. I do not expect anyone to believe in something based only on one person's memory. But I know the difference between a vague noise and my brother speaking. I heard him clearly. More than 15 years later, I can still hear the sentence in my mind. "Vicorge, quick, come here." The first time, it sounded urgent. The second time, impatient. The third time, exactly the same voice waiting directly outside the bathroom door. I opened it almost immediately. The corridor was empty. At the other end of the flat, my brother was tucked into bed with his headphones on, completely confused by my question. He still swears he never called me, and I still do not know what did.
I have been a truck driver for most of my adult life. Over the years, I have driven more roads than I could ever name. Some were wide four-lane highways that passed through busy cities. Others had 6 lanes filled with impatient drivers, flashing lights, and endless traffic. But most of the roads I traveled were quiet 2-lane routes that stretched through small towns, farmland, forests, and places that seemed to disappear from the map after dark. When you spend that much time behind the wheel, roads begin to blend together. You remember certain gas stations, bridges, sharp turns, or old buildings, but you often forget the names of the roads themselves. Sometimes I could drive through the same place several times and still not remember the highway number. Other times I could travel a road only once and remember every detail for the rest of my life. The road from that night is one I cannot clearly name, but I have never forgotten what happened there. It was sometime in 2014. I was driving through Missouri, southeast of Kansas City, near a small town that I do not remember. I know I was somewhere close to Interstate 44 because my route would eventually take me east. I was headed toward Springfield, Ohio, with a load that had to be delivered the following day. It was around 10 o'clock at night. The traffic had become light, and most of the businesses along the road were already closed. A few gas stations were still open, their bright signs glowing against the dark. Every now and then I passed a house with a porch light on, but most of the area was quiet. The sky was clear and the road ahead was dark except for the reach of my headlights. My engine made that steady, familiar sound that truckers get used to after enough years on the road. The radio was playing quietly, but I was not paying much attention to it. I was mainly focused on the road and thinking about how many more hours I wanted to drive before stopping for the night. I came to a traffic light at a crossroads. The light turned red, so I slowed my rig and brought it to a stop. There were no other vehicles waiting at the intersection. I sat there alone, watching the empty road ahead. That was when I noticed someone standing in the distance. At first, I could not tell what I was looking at. The person was about a quarter of a mile ahead, standing near the side of the road. My headlights did not reach that far, but there was enough light from a street lamp to show the shape of a human figure. The figure raised one arm. Even from that distance, I recognized the gesture. The thumb was pointed toward the road, in the familiar sign of someone asking for a ride. I remember staring for a few seconds, trying to decide whether I should stop. Picking up hitchhikers is never a good idea, especially at night. Every truck driver has heard stories about people being robbed, attacked, or tricked after stopping for someone along the road. Most trucking companies also have rules against carrying passengers. Still, the person looked small. From where I sat, I thought it might be a young woman. I looked around the intersection again. The road was empty. There were no houses close by, and no businesses open within walking distance. I wondered how long she had been standing there, and how she had ended up in that place so late at night. I told myself that I would at least drive closer and get a better look. The traffic light turned green. I eased my truck forward, slowly building speed. As I got closer, the figure became clearer. It was a young woman standing beside the road with a travel bag near her feet. She looked to be in her late teens or early 20s. She had long hair and wore clothes that seemed a little old-fashioned for 2014. A sweater was tied around her waist. She wore a short-sleeved V-neck shirt and a pair of cut-off denim shorts that ended high on her thighs. I had no bad intentions toward her. I was simply surprised by the way she was dressed. The outfit reminded me of styles I had seen years earlier, maybe in the late 1990s or early 2000s. It was not impossible for someone to dress that way, but it stood out. She smiled when she saw my truck slowing down. I pulled partly onto the shoulder, leaving enough room between my trailer and the road. I rolled down the passenger side window and leaned across the cab. The young woman grabbed her bag and stepped onto the metal side step below the passenger door. "Where are you headed?" she called. "Springfield, Ohio," I answered. Her face brightened. "Perfect," she said. "I'm going to New York City. I'm going there to make it big." New York City was nowhere near my final destination, but I would be heading east for a long distance. I could at least take her closer than where she was. "You can ride with me for a while," I said. "I'll be stopping near St. Louis later tonight." "That works," she replied quickly. "Anything east helps." I unlocked the passenger door. She opened it, climbed into the cab, and placed her bag on the floor near her feet. It was a medium-sized travel bag made from dark fabric. It looked old and well used, but I did not pay much attention to it at the time. Once she had fastened her seatbelt, I checked my mirrors and pulled back onto the road. Almost immediately, she began talking. She told me she wanted to become famous. She said she had always known she was meant for something bigger than the town where she had grown up. She talked about New York as if it were a magical place where every dream became possible the moment you arrived. "I'm going to be somebody," she said. "People are going to know my name." "What do you want to do?" I asked. "Acting," she said. "Maybe modeling. Singing too if I get the chance." She laughed after saying it, but there was no doubt in her voice. She truly believed she was on her way to a better life. She talked about Times Square, Broadway, movie studios, photographers, and people she hoped to meet. Some of what she said sounded like things she had learned from television rather than real experience. Still, I let her talk. Long drives can become lonely, and having someone in the passenger seat was a change from the usual silence. She spoke with excitement, sometimes so quickly that I had trouble following her. Every few minutes she would look out the window and smile as if she could already see New York waiting ahead. I asked where she had come from. She named a small town, but I did not recognize it. I cannot remember the name now. "Does your family know you're leaving?" I asked. Her smile weakened slightly. "They'll understand later," she said. That answer made me wonder if she had run away from home. I looked at her again. She appeared young, although it was difficult to know exactly how old she was. Her face had a kind of innocence to it, but there was also something tired in her eyes. "You should call them," I said. "At least let them know you're safe." "I will," she replied. She changed the subject immediately and began talking about famous actresses she admired. For the next half hour, she hardly stopped speaking. She told me what kind of apartment she wanted, what clothes she planned to buy, and how she would send money back home after she became successful. There was something almost sad about the way she described it. Her dreams were huge, but she had no clear plan beyond reaching New York City. She had no car, no job waiting, and apparently no safe way to get there. She was traveling alone at night, with only one bag. I considered asking more questions, but I did not want to frighten her or make her feel trapped. I was a stranger after all, and she had trusted me enough to climb into my truck. Eventually, I reached the interstate and turned east. The roads became wider and traffic increased slightly. Cars passed us from time to time, their headlights appearing in my mirrors before moving ahead into the darkness. The young woman continued talking for a while, but her excitement slowly faded. She leaned against the passenger door and looked tired. "You doing all right?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "Just been a long day." She stared through the windshield for several minutes without saying anything. The silence felt different after so much conversation. I could hear the tires rolling over the pavement and the low hum of the engine. The radio had lost its signal and was producing soft static, so I turned it off. After a while, she spoke again. "How long until you stop?" "A few hours," I said. "I'm planning to stay at a truck stop outside St. Louis." She nodded. "Do you have a place to sleep back there?" I glanced toward the curtain behind the seats. "Yeah, there's a bunk." "Would you mind if I lie down for a while?" "Go ahead," I said. "The bed is already made. Get some sleep and I'll wake you when I stop." She thanked me and unfastened her seatbelt. I watched her step carefully between the seats. She picked up her bag, pulled the curtain aside, and disappeared into the sleeper area behind the cab. A moment later, I heard the bunk move slightly as she climbed onto it. "Comfortable?" I called. "Yeah," she answered. "Thank you." "No problem." I faced the road again. For the next couple of hours, I drove without hearing much from her. Once or twice, I thought I heard her shifting behind the curtain, but the sound was so quiet that it might have come from the truck itself. The farther east I traveled, the darker the road seemed. Towns became less frequent, and long areas of empty land stretched on either side of the interstate. I kept checking the time. I was getting tired, but I had driven through worse. The truck stop near St. Louis was familiar to me, and I knew I could make it there safely. Once I fueled up, I planned to park, get some food, and sleep for several hours. I also needed to decide what to do about the young woman. She could probably find another ride at the truck stop, although I was not comfortable leaving her alone in the middle of the night. I thought I might ask another driver if he was heading farther east. At the very least, she could use the restroom, buy something to eat, and call her family. As I approached the exit, I called toward the bunk. "Hey, we're getting close to the truck stop." There was no response. I waited a few seconds and called again. "Miss, we'll be stopping soon." Still nothing. I smiled to myself. She was probably sleeping deeply. She had seemed exhausted before lying down. I raised my voice. "Hey, time to wake up." Nothing. I considered pulling over, but the truck stop was only a few minutes away. It would be safer to wait until I was parked. I took the exit and followed the road toward the glowing truck stop signs. The parking area was busy, with rows of tractor trailers lined up beneath tall lights. I pulled toward the fuel lanes, slowed the truck, and brought it to a stop. After setting the parking brakes, I shut off the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab felt heavy. I removed my seatbelt and called toward the bunk again. "We're here." There was no answer. I stood up from the driver's seat. My knees and back were stiff after several hours of driving. I stretched, then stepped between the seats. The curtain separating the cab from the sleeper area was closed. I reached for it and pulled it aside. The bunk was empty. For a moment, I simply stood there. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I looked toward the lower bunk, then checked the upper storage area. There was nowhere else she could have been. The young woman was gone. So was her bag. I stared at the bed. The blanket was smooth. The pillow was still in place. The sheets did not appear disturbed at all. It looked exactly as it had before she climbed into the back. I touched the blanket with one hand. It was cool. A strange feeling moved through me, but I tried to think logically. Maybe she had climbed out through the sleeper door. Some trucks have a small outside access door near the bunk. Mine did too. It was possible that she had opened it and left without telling me, although I had no idea how she could have done that while we were moving. I reached for the handle and pulled. The door did not move. It was still locked. I checked it again. Harder this time. Locked. I looked around the sleeper area, searching for anything she might have left behind. There was nothing. No shoe, no hair, no mark on the bed, and no sign that another person had ever been there. I returned to the front of the cab and checked the passenger door. It was closed and locked. I knew it had never opened while I was driving. If someone had opened that large door at highway speed, I would have heard it immediately. The wind alone would have filled the cab. The interior light might have come on. I would have noticed. I checked the floor where she had placed her bag. Empty. I stood in the middle of the cab, trying to understand what had happened. Since picking her up, I had driven between 40 and 70 miles per hour. I had not stopped once. I had not slowed enough for anyone to safely jump out. Even if she had somehow opened the sleeper door, she could not have left the truck without being badly injured or killed. And the door had been locked from the inside. I stepped out of the truck and looked around the fuel area. Several drivers were fueling their rigs. A man in a baseball cap walked toward the main building carrying a large drink cup. Cars moved through the parking lot. Everything looked normal. I searched near the passenger side of my truck. There was no sign of her. I walked around the trailer, looking underneath it and between the parked trucks. I knew it made no sense, but I kept expecting to see her walking away with her bag. She was nowhere. I went inside the truck stop and looked through the store. I checked the food area, the hallway near the restrooms, and the entrance. No young woman matching her description was there. I even asked the cashier if she had seen a young woman enter recently. I described her clothes and the dark travel bag. The cashier shook her head. "No, I don't think so." I returned to my truck. By then, my confusion had turned into fear. I sat in the driver's seat with the doors locked and looked at the curtain behind me. I did not want to open it again. Part of me feared that she would suddenly be sitting on the bunk, staring back at me. But another part of me wanted her to return. If she appeared again, at least there might be some kind of explanation. I forced myself to check the sleeper area one more time. It was still empty. I thought about the moment I had first seen her, standing beside the road. I remembered the way she had raised her thumb, the way she had smiled, and how quickly she had climbed into my truck. I remembered her clothes and how they seemed slightly out of date. I remembered her talking about going to New York City and becoming famous. Then I remembered something else. She had never taken out a phone. Even in 2014, almost everyone her age carried one. She had not checked the time, sent a message, or called anyone. When I suggested contacting her family, she had agreed, but never made any attempt to do it. I also could not remember seeing her reflection clearly in the passenger window at night, although I told myself that meant nothing. I had been focused on driving. The more I thought about it, the worse I felt. I wondered whether a young woman had once disappeared along that road. Maybe she had been trying to reach New York and never made it. Maybe she had been hit by a car, murdered, or left to die somewhere nearby. Those thoughts were only guesses, and I had no proof, but sitting alone in that truck, they felt possible. I tried to sleep that night, but I could not. Every sound from the sleeper area made me open my eyes. The truck creaked as it cooled. Air brakes released somewhere in the parking lot. Engines started and stopped. Drivers walked past outside. Each time a shadow moved across the curtain, I thought she had returned. At one point, I heard what sounded like fabric shifting behind me. I turned on every light in the cab and pulled the curtain open. The bed was empty. I left the curtain open after that. By morning, I had barely slept at all. My head hurt, my eyes burned, and I felt sick from exhaustion. I was late for my delivery because I had to stop more often than planned. I could not keep my mind on the road. For days afterward, I kept wondering whether I had imagined the whole thing, but I knew I had not. I remembered her voice clearly. I remembered the passenger seat moving when she climbed in. I remembered speaking to her for hours. I remembered hearing her answer when I asked if she was comfortable in the bunk. She had been there. I just had no idea what she was. I never found out who she was, where she came from, or what happened to her. I searched online once or twice for stories about missing women along that road, but I did not have enough information to find anything useful. I did not know the exact town, the highway number, or even the name of the place she claimed to be from. Eventually, I stopped looking. Even now, years later, I sometimes think about her when I drive alone at night. I picture her standing beneath that distant streetlight with her bag beside her, raising her hand as my truck approached. I wonder how many other drivers passed her before I stopped. I wonder whether anyone else has picked her up. Most of all, I wonder what might have happened if I had looked behind the curtain while the truck was still moving. That night changed one rule for me permanently. No matter how lonely the road is, no matter how harmless someone looks, and no matter how bad I feel about leaving them behind, I never pick up hitchhikers anymore.
Forgive me for stepping in for just a moment. If you've only recently found your way here, then welcome. I'm glad you came. If these stories are keeping you company tonight, consider subscribing to Crowvane Manor. New stories arrive here often, the kind that stay with you long after the night is over. And if you tap the bell, you won't have to go looking. The next one will find you on its own. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to where we left off.
When I was very young, I had parents who were incredibly kind and understanding. On weekends, they would let me sleep in the living room instead of my bedroom. It was something I always looked forward to, because my sister was a very light sleeper, and sleeping in the living room meant I could stay awake as late as I wanted without bothering anyone. To me, it felt like having my own little space. The house would become quiet, everyone else would go to sleep, and I would stay on the couch watching late-night television. At the time, it felt like the perfect weekend tradition. Of course, like most kids who think staying awake until sunrise is the greatest idea ever, I usually failed. I would tell myself I was going to stay awake all night. I would make plans. I would promise myself I would watch everything. Then eventually, I would fall asleep on the couch. One night, that is exactly what happened. I was lying on the couch in the living room, watching television late at night. The house was completely quiet. Everyone else was asleep. We lived in rural Georgia, so our surroundings were very different from living in a neighborhood full of streetlights and houses close together. There was a lot of land around us. A lot of trees. The kind of trees that seemed to disappear into darkness at night. During the day, they were just normal trees. They were part of the scenery. Something you barely noticed. But at night, especially when you are a child lying alone in a quiet house, they became something completely different. The darkness between them felt endless. The shadows looked deeper. Every small sound seemed louder. At some point during the night, I woke up. I don't know exactly what woke me. There was no loud noise, no obvious reason. It was just a strange feeling, a sudden instinct, like some part of me noticed something was wrong before I even understood why. My eyes opened, and almost immediately, I sat straight up. I looked toward the front window. At first, I wasn't sure what I was seeing. The room was dark, but moonlight was shining through the window. The light was bright enough to reveal the shapes outside, and that was when I saw it. A silhouette. Someone was in the tree outside. I froze. For a few seconds, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. It didn't make sense. There was just a person-shaped figure sitting or standing in the branches of the tree, completely still. Watching, the moonlight made the outline clear enough that I knew I wasn't just seeing random shadows. There was someone there, outside my house. In the tree. I was terrified. And then, as if my fear needed any help becoming worse, our family dog suddenly ran toward the window. The dog started growling, not a playful growl, not the kind of sound a dog makes when it wants attention. This was different. The dog was focused on whatever was outside, standing at the glass, staring into the darkness, snarling at the figure I had seen. That was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining things. Even as a child, I understood that my dog was reacting to something. Something was really there. I didn't wait any longer. I jumped up and ran as fast as I could to my parents' bedroom. I was trying to explain what I saw, but I was scared, and my words were coming out all mixed together. I told them there was someone outside, someone in the tree, someone watching the house. My parents woke up confused at first. They probably thought I had just had a nightmare. After all, kids wake up scared all the time. But something about how frightened I was must have made my dad realize I wasn't just making it up. He got up, grabbed something to defend himself with, and went outside with the dogs. I remember standing there with my mom, shaking, waiting, listening. Every second felt longer than the last. The house that had felt safe only minutes earlier suddenly felt completely different. Every sound made me nervous. Every shadow made me wonder if someone was still outside. I kept imagining the person in the tree, wondering what they wanted, wondering how long they had been there, wondering if they had been watching me before I woke up. Eventually, my dad came back inside. He told us he didn't see anyone. He checked outside, but there was nobody there. No person, no explanation. Nothing. He told me everything was okay and that I should go back to sleep. But I couldn't. How could I? I had just seen someone outside my house. Maybe an adult could explain it away. Maybe there was another reason. Maybe the shadows had played tricks on me. But as a child, all I knew was what I had seen. Someone was there. So I decided I didn't want to sleep in the living room anymore. I went back to my normal bedroom. I told my sister what happened. I remember trying to explain every detail. The tree, the silhouette, the dog reacting, my dad going outside. I don't remember whether she believed me completely, but I know I was still scared. Eventually, the house became quiet again. My dad was walking around doing his normal rounds through the house while drinking coffee. Everything seemed calm. Everyone was still. Slowly, I started convincing myself that maybe it was over. Maybe my dad was right. Maybe there was nobody there. Maybe I could finally sleep. I remember thinking, I can sleep now. But then I looked toward my window, and I saw him. The same person. Outside, I could see the figure in the moonlight. I couldn't see every detail, but I knew it was the same person I had seen before. And then something happened that I still remember. The person raised a hand and made a gesture, a shush signal, like telling me to be quiet, like they knew I was watching, like they knew I could see them. My entire body froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even call for my parents. Then, just as quickly as I had seen them, the person turned around and ran away. Not slowly, not casually. They turned and ran straight away into the darkness. I don't remember exactly how long I cried afterward. It felt like hours. I remember being completely overwhelmed by fear, the kind of fear where you don't just feel scared, you feel helpless. Because I was a child, I was inside my own home, the place where I was supposed to feel safest. But someone had been outside. Someone had been close enough for me to see them, close enough for my dog to react, close enough to make that terrifying gesture at me. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. I still wonder who that person was. I still wonder how long they had been there. I still wonder if they were watching the house before I woke up. The strangest part is that nothing else happened. There was no attack, no break-in, no explanation. Just a person in the darkness appearing twice outside my home and leaving behind a memory that never went away. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Maybe there was something I didn't understand. But when you are a child, seeing a stranger outside your window in the middle of the night is not something your mind easily forgets, especially when that person looks directly at you and tells you to stay quiet. Some scary moments are frightening because of what happens. Others are frightening because of what almost happened. And this was one of those moments that stayed with me, because I never found out the truth. I only know what I saw. A person outside my house, a shadow in the trees, a silent warning through the glass, and a night I will never forget.
My mom, when she was much younger, and even now, she still cannot explain what took place inside that house. At the time, she lived with her parents and her brother in an old Victorian house, not far from where I live today. I have passed the area many times, and whenever I do, I think about the stories connected to that place. This was not the only strange thing that happened there, but it was one of the experiences that frightened my mom the most. The house was enormous. It had 4 floors, high ceilings, long corridors, large rooms, and heavy wooden doors. Like many old Victorian homes, it looked impressive from the outside, but inside it could feel dark and cold, even during the day. There were parts of the house where you could stand completely still and hear nothing at all. The walls were thick, and the rooms were spread far apart. If somebody was at the front of the house while another person was at the back, they could shout and still struggle to hear each other. Usually, the house was full of normal family noise. There were footsteps on the stairs, doors opening and closing, conversations coming from different rooms, and the dogs moving around. On the day this happened, however, my grandparents had gone out, leaving only my mom and her brother at home. At first, they were not worried about being alone. They had lived there for years and knew the house well. They also had the family dogs with them, so there was no reason to feel unsafe. My mom and her brother were sitting in a room at the back of the house. It was at the end of a very long hallway, far away from the front entrance. They were arguing about something small and unimportant. Neither of them can remember exactly what started it. It was probably the kind of pointless disagreement brothers and sisters have all the time. Their voices became louder as they talked over each other. Because they were arguing, they were not paying much attention to anything happening elsewhere in the house. Then, the dogs suddenly began barking in the kitchen. At first, my mom and her brother ignored them. The dogs sometimes barked at people walking past the house or at sounds coming from outside. There were neighbors nearby, and old houses often made strange noises. Pipes knocked, floorboards creaked, and windows moved slightly when the wind was strong, but this did not sound like normal barking. Within seconds, the dogs were howling and throwing themselves around the kitchen. Their claws scraped against the floor, and their barking became sharp and panicked. It sounded as if they had seen someone they did not recognize. My mom and her brother stopped arguing. They listened for a few moments, expecting the dogs to calm down. Instead, the noise grew worse. The kitchen was not close to the back room, so for the barking to sound that loud, the dogs had to be making a terrible amount of noise. My mom called out to them, but they did not respond. She and her brother finally left the room and walked down the hallway toward the kitchen. As they got closer, they could hear the dogs growling between their barks. The sound was low and aggressive, but there was also fear in it. When they entered the kitchen, the dogs were standing together, staring toward the cellar door. The door was wide open. Both my mom and her brother stopped where they were. They knew that door had not been left open. The cellar was one of the darkest and most unpleasant parts of the house. It was large, much larger than the cellars found in newer homes. Stone steps led down into a wide underground space with rough walls and a cold floor. There was also an old coal chute, which had once been used to deliver coal from outside. Like many features in Victorian houses, it was still there even though the family no longer used it. The cellar had very little natural light. Even during the day, it remained dark unless someone switched on the lights. From the kitchen doorway, the stairs seemed to disappear into blackness. The dogs refused to go near it. My mum tried to calm them. She spoke gently and told them there was nothing there. Her brother also called them by name and ordered them to settle down. Normally, the dogs listened. That day, they acted as though they could not even hear the commands. They kept staring into the cellar. Their bodies were tense, and the hair along their backs was raised. Every few seconds, one of them would bark toward the darkness and then step backwards. My mum and her brother stood at the top of the cellar stairs and looked down. They did not see anyone. They did not hear footsteps, breathing, or movement. Still, neither of them wanted to go down there. They began wondering whether their parents had returned without them hearing. Perhaps their father had gone into the cellar for something and had left the door open. It seemed unlikely, but it was better than imagining a stranger inside the house. They moved away from the cellar and walked through the hallway toward the front of the house. The front entrance was closed. There were no coats that had not been there earlier. No keys had been placed on the table. No voices came from the sitting room. My grandfather's car was not outside. They checked the front rooms and called for their parents, but nobody answered. The house was still empty. My mum's brother suggested that the cellar door might have opened by itself. It was an old house, after all. Maybe the latch had not caught properly. Maybe a draft had pushed it open. It was not a very convincing explanation, but neither of them wanted to admit they were frightened. They returned toward the back room, expecting to find everything as they had left it. Instead, when they reached the end of the hallway, they saw that the large double doors leading into the room were standing wide open. Before going to the kitchen, they had not left them that way. The doors were heavy. They did not swing open easily, and they did not move because of a small draft. Someone had to push them. For a moment, my mum and her brother simply stared. The dogs began barking again behind them. The sound echoed through the long hallway and made the house feel even larger and emptier than before. My mum's brother asked whether she had opened the doors before they left the room. She said no. He insisted that one of them must have done it without remembering, but my mum knew they had both left through only one side. They had not pulled both doors wide open. They looked inside the room. Nothing appeared to be missing. The furniture had not moved. The windows were closed, and there was no sign that anyone had entered. Still, the feeling in the house had changed. My mum later said it no longer felt as though they were alone. The dogs continued to growl. They moved restlessly between the kitchen and the hallway, refusing to settle in one place. Every time they looked toward the cellar, they began barking again. By then, my mum and her brother were genuinely scared. They decided to lock everything. They checked the front entrance, the back door, and the accessible windows. They made sure that no one could have entered from outside. They also closed the cellar door and secured it. The house became quiet again, but it was not a comforting silence. It felt as if they were waiting for something else to happen. My mum decided to check the upper floors. She wanted to make sure no one had somehow entered one of the bedrooms while they were distracted by the dogs. Her brother stayed downstairs. The staircase was long, and the wooden steps creaked under her feet as she climbed. The higher she went, the quieter the house became. She checked the rooms one by one. The bedrooms were empty. The curtains were still. The windows were closed. Nothing looked disturbed. She looked behind doors and glanced into cupboards, although she felt foolish doing it. There was no reason for anyone to be hiding upstairs, but after seeing the cellar and the double doors open, she could not relax. Once she felt certain that the upper floor was empty, she decided to use the bathroom before going back downstairs. She closed the bathroom door behind her. For a short time, there was complete silence. Then, she heard a scream from below. It was her brother. The scream was so sudden and so full of fear that my mum froze. A second later, loud banging began somewhere downstairs. At first, she could not tell where it was coming from. The sound traveled through the house, striking the walls and floor. It sounded as if someone was hitting a heavy wooden door again and again. Her brother screamed her name. My mum ran out of the bathroom and rushed toward the staircase. As she descended, the banging became louder. She could hear the dogs barking wildly again. Their paws scratched across the floor while her brother continued shouting. She reached the bottom of the stairs and ran toward the kitchen. That was when she realized the banging was coming from the cellar door. The door was shut. The handle was moving violently, and the entire door was shaking in its frame. Her brother was on the other side. He was trapped inside the cellar. He shouted at her to open the door. His voice was full of panic and anger. He was hitting the wood with both hands, trying to force it open. My mum rushed forward and looked at the lock. The cellar door had been secured from the outside. She removed the lock as quickly as she could and pulled the door open. Her brother stumbled out of the darkness. He was pale, shaking, and furious. He immediately accused my mum of locking him inside. He shouted at her, demanding to know why she had done it. He thought she was trying to frighten him as revenge for their earlier argument. My mum told him she had been upstairs the entire time. He did not believe her. He was too frightened and angry to listen. He kept saying that she must have followed him into the kitchen, waited until he went into the cellar, and then shut the door. My mum swore that she had not. She explained that she had been in the bathroom when she heard him screaming. She reminded him how long it had taken her to run from the upper floor to the kitchen. There was no possible way she could have locked him in and then somehow returned upstairs before he began shouting. Her brother slowly stopped arguing. He stared at her, and the anger on his face began to disappear. That was when he understood she was telling the truth. My mum asked him why he had gone into the cellar. He said he had heard something after she went upstairs. He could not explain exactly what it was. It may have been a movement, a knock, or something shifting below the kitchen. Because they had already found the cellar door open once, he wanted to check that no one was hiding down there. He opened the door and stepped into the cellar. He had only gone a short distance when the door slammed shut behind him. The cellar became dark. He ran back up the steps and tried the handle, but the door would not open. At first, he thought it had simply jammed. Then, he heard the lock being moved on the other side. He was certain my mum was doing it. He called her name and told her to stop. There was no answer. He began shouting and hitting the door. When it still did not open, he panicked. He knew the cellar was large, but it had no safe exit he could reach. The coal chute was too small and difficult to access, and he did not want to move deeper into the darkness. The dogs were barking outside the door, but he could not hear my mum. That was when he started screaming. After hearing his explanation, neither of them wanted to stay in the house for another second. They did not stop to search the cellar. They did not try to explain how the door had closed or how the lock had been secured from the outside. They ran. My mum and her brother rushed through the hallway, opened the front door, and went straight into the street. The dogs came with them. Once outside, they stood away from the house and waited. Neither of them wanted to go back inside, even though all their belongings were still there. They remained in the street until their parents returned. I do not know exactly how long they waited, but it must have felt like hours. When my grandparents finally came home, they found both children standing outside with the dogs. My mom and her brother were frightened and talking over each other as they tried to explain what had happened. My grandfather has always been a very cynical man. He does not easily believe stories about ghosts, spirits, or anything supernatural. If someone tells him something strange happened, his first reaction is usually to look for a normal explanation. He assumes that a door was left open, a person became confused, or an old building made a noise. However, when he heard their story, he did not laugh. He did not accuse them of imagining it. He went straight inside, picked up his baseball bat, and searched the entire house. He checked every floor. He looked inside every room, behind every door, and inside every cupboard large enough for a person to hide. He inspected the windows and entrances. He searched the kitchen and then went down into the cellar. He checked the coal chute and every dark corner. If someone had broken into the house, my grandfather intended to find them. There was nobody there. Nothing had been stolen. No window had been broken. No lock showed signs of being forced. There was no evidence that a stranger had entered or left. The cellar was empty. The doors were still working normally. My grandfather tested the cellar lock. It could only be secured from the kitchen side. A person inside the cellar could not reach it. That meant my mom's brother could not have locked himself in by accident. My mom could not have done it either, because she had been upstairs when the screaming began. The dogs had also reacted before any of them knew something was wrong. They had stared into the cellar and barked, as though someone was standing in the darkness. My grandfather searched again, but he found nothing. Eventually, the family went back inside. My mom and her brother stayed close to their parents for the rest of the day. Neither of them wanted to walk through the house alone, and they avoided the cellar whenever possible after that. Over the years, they tried to find ordinary explanations. Perhaps the cellar door had a faulty latch. Perhaps the lock had somehow fallen into place. Perhaps the double doors at the back of the house had moved because of air pressure. Perhaps the dogs had heard an animal inside the walls. Each explanation might account for one part of the story, but none explained everything. It did not explain how the cellar door first opened. It did not explain why both heavy double doors opened while they were checking the front of the house. It did not explain why the dogs became terrified and stared into the cellar. Most of all, it did not explain how my mom's brother was locked inside while she was upstairs. My mom still insists that she did not touch the cellar door. Her brother believes her. Whatever happened in that house frightened both of them enough to make them run into the street and refuse to return until their parents came home. This was only one of many disturbing stories connected to that old Victorian house. Some were smaller incidents, others were harder to dismiss. But the story of the cellar door has always stayed with my mom because it happened in the middle of the day, while both of them were awake, and while the house was locked. They were not dreaming. They were not telling ghost stories. They were not trying to scare each other. They were simply two young people arguing in the back room of an empty house. Then the dogs began barking. The cellar door opened. The other doors moved. And somehow, while my mom was several floors above him, her brother was locked in the darkness from the outside. To this day, nobody in the family knows who or what closed that door. When I was 12 years old in my grandfather's house, and even now, at 26, I can still remember every detail of what I saw in his basement. My grandfather was 66 at the time. He is 80 now. He had lived in that house for years, and I had been there often enough to know where everything was. Nothing about the place felt strange to me. It was my grandfather's home. It was familiar, comfortable, and full of things that had been there for as long as I could remember. The basement was one of those places where the family spent a lot of time. It was not a dark, empty storage room filled with boxes and broken furniture. My grandfather had turned part of it into a proper little bar area. The bar had been handmade and was much more beautiful than something you would buy from a store. It had one long side that stretched across part of the basement, then turned and continued along another wall. The shape gave it the feeling of a real bar, even though it was inside a family home. There were stools lined up in front of it, shelves behind it, and a small sign that could be turned to show either open or closed. It was partly a joke, but my uncle sometimes used it when he sat there drinking. He would turn the sign to open, take a seat at the bar, and act as if the place was open for business. Near the bar was a refrigerator. It was used for drinks, including the ginger ale my grandfather liked. The refrigerator door opened toward the bar, which meant that when someone opened it and leaned down, the door blocked most of the view of the bar area. Past the far end of the bar was the part of the basement where my uncle slept. It was not separated by a solid wall and a normal door. There was a curtain that could be pulled across the opening, giving him some privacy. My uncle's sleeping area was always easy to recognize. He kept it clean, and his belongings were usually arranged in the same way. He had his own style as well. He mostly wore sports jerseys, fitted caps, jeans or shorts, and sneakers. He was not the kind of person who dressed like a cowboy. That detail matters. One day, my grandfather asked me to go into the basement and get a bottle of ginger ale from the refrigerator. It was a completely normal request. I did not feel nervous about going down there. I had been in that basement many times, and I knew exactly where the drinks were kept. I went down the stairs without thinking about anything except getting the ginger ale and bringing it back upstairs. The basement was quiet. I do not remember hearing music, a television, or any conversation. My uncle was somewhere in the house, or at least I assumed he was. It would not have been unusual for him to be in his sleeping area or sitting at the bar. I walked over to the refrigerator and opened the door. As usual, the door swung outward toward the bar, blocking my view of the stools and most of the counter. I bent down and looked through the bottles until I found my grandfather's ginger ale. I reached inside, took it out, and straightened up. When I closed the refrigerator door, I realized that someone was sitting at the bar. For a moment, I was not scared. I assumed it was my uncle. That was the most obvious explanation. My uncle often sat there, and he sometimes had a drink while he relaxed. The open sign had been turned to show that the bar was open, which made me even more certain that it was him. The person had his back partly turned toward me and appeared to be drinking. I called out my uncle's name. The person did not answer. Instead, he slowly stood up from the stool. That was when I noticed he was a little taller than my uncle. The difference was not extreme, but it was enough to make me look more carefully. The man turned slightly toward me. He was wearing a cowboy hat. He had silver hair and was dressed in a white tank top, bootcut jeans, and cowboy boots. Everything about the outfit looked real and complete. It did not look like a cheap costume or something thrown together as a joke. At 12 years old, I did not immediately think I was looking at a ghost. My first thought was that my uncle had found an incredible outfit. The clothes were so different from what he normally wore that I was impressed. My uncle usually dressed in jerseys, fitted hats, and sneakers. Seeing someone at the bar dressed like a cowboy seemed strange, but I still believed it must be him. The man did not speak. He looked in my direction, lifted one hand to the brim of his cowboy hat, and tipped it toward me. It was a calm, polite gesture. Then he turned and walked toward the area where my uncle slept. He moved past the end of the bar and disappeared behind the curtain. There was nothing hurried or frightening about the way he moved. He did not run. He did not hide his face. He simply stood, tipped his hat, and walked away. That calmness is probably why I followed him. Had he screamed, moved suddenly, or behaved strangely, I might have run upstairs immediately. Instead, I was curious. I wanted to know where my uncle had found the outfit and why he was wearing it. I remember thinking it looked incredibly cool. I walked around the bar toward the curtain. The ginger ale was still in my hand. I reached the opening and pulled the curtain back. My uncle's bed was empty. The room was clean, just as it usually was. There was no one standing near the bed. There was no one crouching behind the furniture. There was no second doorway. Most importantly, there was no man wearing a cowboy hat. I stood there for a second, staring into the empty space. My mind tried to understand what I was seeing. The man had walked directly into that area only moments earlier. I had watched him move toward the curtain. There had not been enough time for him to change clothes, hide, or leave. There was nowhere for him to go. The sleeping area was not large, and I could see nearly all of it from where I stood. The bed was empty. The room was neat. Nothing was moving. The cowboy was gone. That was when the fear hit me. It was not a slow feeling that grew over time. It came all at once. A cold chill ran through my body, and I suddenly felt as if the entire basement had changed around me. The familiar bar, the refrigerator, the stools, and the curtain no longer felt normal. Only seconds earlier, I had believed I was standing near my uncle. Now I realized I had been following someone who should not have been there. I backed away from the curtain. I looked around the basement again, but there was no sign of the man. The stool where he had been sitting was empty. The room was silent. I did not stay to search. I turned and ran toward the stairs, still holding my grandfather's ginger ale. I moved so quickly that I shook the bottle the entire way up. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, my hands were trembling. My face must have looked completely pale because my grandfather noticed immediately. He looked at me and made a joke, asking whether I had seen a ghost. He did not sound serious. To him, I was a 12-year-old child who had gone into the basement for a drink and returned looking terrified. He probably assumed my uncle had jumped out and frightened me, or that I had seen a spider, heard a strange noise, or allowed my imagination to get the better of me. I told him I had seen someone. My grandfather was still smiling at first. Then I started describing the man. I said there had been someone sitting at the bar drinking. I explained that I had thought it was my uncle, but the person was slightly taller. I told him about the silver hair, the white tank top, the bootcut jeans, the cowboy boots, and the cowboy hat. I told him the man had stood up after I called my uncle's name. I described how he had tipped his hat toward me and walked behind the curtain where my uncle slept. I told my grandfather that I had followed him. Then I explained that the room had been empty. As I spoke, my grandfather's expression changed. The joking look disappeared. He did not interrupt me or tell me I had imagined it. Instead, his face seemed to brighten with recognition. His eyes filled with emotion, and he looked as though he was close to tears. At first, I did not understand why. I had expected him to be concerned or frightened. I thought he might go downstairs to search the basement or ask whether I was certain about what I had seen. Instead, he seemed moved. Then he told me about the bar. I already knew it was handmade, but I had never understood the full story behind it. The bar had been built by my grandfather's best friend many years earlier. They had been close friends for around 40 years. They had done almost everything together and had shared a friendship that lasted through much of their adult lives. The man I had described was the friend who had built the bar. He had made it as a gift for my grandfather because they both loved drinking together. It was not a simple project. He had built every part of it by hand. The woodwork had been carefully shaped and finished. The leather had been stitched by hand. Every detail had been created with time, skill, and care. The bar was not only a piece of furniture, it represented their friendship. It had been made by one friend for another, designed for the two of them to sit together, have drinks, and enjoy each other's company. My grandfather's friend had died before I ever saw him. He passed away after falling during a hike and being exposed to the weather. The way he died was tragic and unexpected. After his death, my grandfather stopped drinking. He did not destroy the bar or get rid of it. He kept it because his best friend had built it for him. Even though he no longer used it in the same way, it remained in the basement as a reminder of their friendship. As my grandfather told me this, I began to understand why he had reacted the way he did. The clothes I described matched his friend. The silver hair, the cowboy hat, the white tank top, the bootcut jeans, the cowboy boots. I had never met the man. I had never seen him alive. As far as I knew, I had never been shown a photograph of him wearing those clothes. There was no reason I should have been able to describe him so clearly. Yet I had seen him sitting at the bar he had built. After hearing the story, we went back downstairs. I did not want to return to the basement, but my grandfather came with me. The area was quiet. The stool was empty, exactly as it had been when I ran upstairs. The curtain was still near my uncle's sleeping area, and the room behind it remained empty. Then we noticed the sign. It had been turned to open. That was something my uncle sometimes did when he sat at the bar. But my uncle had not been the person I had seen. The man in the cowboy hat had been sitting there as if the bar were open again, as if he had returned to the place he had built and loved. Then we looked at the counter. There was a shot glass on the bar. It had belonged to my grandfather's friend and had been his favorite glass. The shot glass was upside down. Written on the bar in marker were the words, "Drink up, bud." That message had special meaning because drinking together had been such a large part of their friendship. My grandfather had stopped drinking after his friend died, but the bar remained as a reminder of those years. The man I saw had appeared there, sitting in his old place, with the sign turned to open. He had been drinking when I first noticed him. Then, after I called out to him, he had stood, tipped his hat, and quietly walked away. The whole experience lasted only a short time. I was not in the basement for very long, and the man did not speak to me. He did not threaten me. He did not make any frightening movement. He did not chase me or try to touch me. He only acknowledged me with the tip of his hat. Still, the encounter frightened me deeply because of how real he looked. He was not a shadow in the corner of my eye. He was not a reflection in glass. He was not a shape that could have been mistaken for clothing or furniture. I saw a complete person sitting at the bar. I saw his hair. I saw his clothes. I saw the hat on his head and the boots on his feet. I watched him stand up. I watched him tip his hat. I watched him walk across the basement and disappear behind the curtain. The only reason I became frightened was because he was no longer there when I followed him. Had I not pulled back that curtain, I might have continued believing it was my uncle in a strange outfit. That is what makes the memory so powerful. At first, nothing about the man seemed unreal. He looked solid. He moved normally. He seemed completely at home behind the bar. In a way, he was at home there. He had built it with his own hands. He had stitched the leather, shaped the wood, and created it as a gift for his closest friend. He had probably spent many nights sitting at that same counter with my grandfather, drinking, talking, laughing, and sharing stories. The bar was connected to him in a way few objects are connected to the people who make them. Perhaps that is why he appeared there. I cannot prove what I saw. I understand that memory can change over time. especially memories from childhood. People forget details, combine moments, or remember things differently as the years pass. But this memory has never faded. I remember the refrigerator door blocking my view. I remember closing it and seeing someone at the bar. I remember thinking it was my uncle. I remember calling his name. I remember the cowboy standing up. I remember the movement of his hand as he tipped his hat. I remember following him because I wanted to see the outfit more closely. I remember pulling back the curtain. I remember the empty bed. I remember the cold shock that passed through my body when I realized there was nobody there. And I remember my grandfather's face when I described the man. His reaction told me more than anything else could have. He recognized the person from my description before I understood who I had seen. He did not look frightened. He looked happy, surprised, and deeply emotional. It was as though, for a few seconds, he had received proof that his friend had not completely left him. The experience terrified me at 12 years old. But as I grew older, I began to see it differently. I still believe it was a ghost. I do not know what else to call it. However, I do not think the man meant to scare me. He did not appear angry or lost. He seemed calm. He sat at the bar, had a drink, acknowledged me politely, and left. The tip of the hat felt almost like a greeting. It may even have been a goodbye. Perhaps he had come to visit my grandfather. Perhaps he wanted to sit at the bar one more time. Perhaps he wanted my grandfather to know that their friendship still mattered, even after death. I often wonder whether he knew I would tell my grandfather what I had seen. Maybe that was the reason he allowed me to see him. My grandfather might have dismissed a noise, a moving object, or a strange shadow, but a clear description of his best friend, given by a child who had never met him, was harder to ignore. I described the exact type of person my grandfather remembered. The silver-haired cowboy in the white tank top, bootcut jeans and boots. The man who had built the bar. The man who had once sat there and shared drinks with him. The friend he had lost during a hike. My grandfather is 80 now, and I am 26. 14 years have passed since that day. The memory still gives me chills, especially when I picture the cowboy walking toward my uncle's room and disappearing behind the curtain. But it no longer feels like a completely dark or evil story. There was fear in the moment, but there was also love behind it. My grandfather kept that bar because he loved and missed his friend. His friend had built it as a gift because they had shared so much of their lives together. Years after his death, I saw someone matching his description sitting at that same bar. The sign was turned to open. His favorite shot glass was there. And the message on the bar still read, "Drink up, bud." I cannot explain why he appeared to me instead of my grandfather. I cannot explain how he vanished from a room with nowhere to go. I cannot explain how real he looked. All I know is what I saw. I went into the basement to get a bottle of ginger ale. I found a silver-haired man dressed like a cowboy drinking alone at my grandfather's handmade bar. I called out to him, believing he was my uncle. He stood up, tipped his hat, and walked away. When I followed him, there was no one there, and when I described him to my grandfather, he recognized the best friend he had lost years before. My husband and I were driving north on Route 1 late one night, heading away from Point Reyes in the direction of Elk. It was around 11 o'clock, and the entire area was completely dark. Anyone who has driven along that part of the coast knows how isolated it can feel, especially at night. During the day, the road is beautiful. You can see forests, hills, cliffs, small towns, and occasional views of the ocean. At night, however, most of that disappears. There are long stretches without streetlights, houses, gas stations, or any clear sign that other people are nearby. That night, the darkness seemed even heavier than usual. There had been no traffic for a long time. No cars had passed us in the opposite direction, and there were no headlights behind us. It felt as though we had the entire road to ourselves. Route 1 is not the kind of road where you can relax and drive quickly. It curves constantly, winding around hills and through wooded areas. One moment, the road appears straight, and the next, it bends sharply around a dark hillside. You have to pay attention, because you never know when another turn will appear. Because of that, we were driving slowly. The road ahead was only visible where our headlights reached. Beyond that narrow area of light, everything was black. The trees on both sides appeared for a few seconds as we passed them, and then disappeared behind us again. Inside the car, my husband and I were calm. We were tired, but not unusually so. We had been talking on and off, enjoying the quiet drive and listening to music. The music probably made the atmosphere worse. We had put on some slow, heavy drone rock. It was dark and repetitive, with deep sounds that seemed to stretch on forever. At the time, we were not trying to frighten ourselves. We simply liked the music. Looking back, it was probably the worst possible soundtrack for what happened next. The low music filled the car as we continued along the empty road. Outside, there was nothing but darkness, trees, and the occasional road sign appearing suddenly in our headlights. We came to another wooded area on the left side of the road. It looked no different from the other patches of forest we had already passed. The trees were thick and close together. Our headlights briefly touched the edges of the trunks, but the deeper parts of the woods remained completely black. I was looking ahead when something moved at the edge of my vision. It happened so quickly that, for a moment, I did not understand what I had seen. There was a sudden pale flash outside the car, somewhere behind us on the left. My first thought was that it might have been an animal. Deer were common in the area, and on a road like that, you had to watch for them. I immediately looked up into the rearview mirror, expecting to see one standing near the side of the road. Instead, I saw a man. He had come running out of the forest behind us. He was completely naked. He ran directly into the road and began waving both arms at our car as we moved away from him. For several seconds, I could not speak. The man stood out with frightening clarity against the darkness. His skin looked pale in the fading red light from the back of our car, and behind him was nothing but a wall of black trees. He was not walking calmly or casually trying to get our attention. He was running. His arms were moving wildly above his head, and from the way he carried himself, he looked either completely crazed or absolutely terrified. Perhaps he was both. I kept staring into the mirror as the distance between us increased. The car continued moving forward, following the curve of the road, while the man became smaller behind us. I remember trying to understand what I was looking at. It was such an impossible sight that my mind could not make sense of it. We were in the middle of a rural area late at night. There were no nearby houses, parked cars, campsites, or businesses that we could see. There was no reason for a naked man to be running out of the forest. I asked my husband whether he had seen him. He had. That was important because, for one strange second, I wondered whether the darkness, tiredness, and music had confused me. Maybe I had seen a reflection in the window. Maybe a sign or an animal had briefly looked human. But my husband had seen exactly the same thing. A naked man had run out of the woods and into the road behind our car. He had been waving at us. We drove on for several more seconds, both of us shocked. The whole thing happened too quickly for us to react properly. By the time my mind caught up with what my eyes had seen, we had already traveled farther down the road. I looked behind us again, but the man was becoming difficult to see. The road curved, and the darkness swallowed him. My husband and I started talking at the same time. Did you see that? What was he doing? Was he asking for help? Should we stop? Neither of us had an answer. The man's expression had been difficult to see clearly from that distance, but his movements were impossible to misunderstand. There had been panic in the way he ran. He had not looked like someone playing a joke. He had not looked drunk and cheerful. He had looked desperate. That realization changed everything. Our first reaction had been confusion, but now fear began to replace it. If the man was truly asking for help, something terrible might have happened in the woods. He could have been injured. He could have been lost. Someone could have taken his clothes. He could have escaped from a person who had attacked him. There were too many possibilities, and none of them were good. We decided to turn around. There was no safe place to make an immediate turn, so we continued until we found enough space. It could not have taken more than 20 seconds, although it felt longer. During that time, I kept thinking about the way the man had appeared. He had come out of the forest suddenly, as if he had been waiting for a car or had heard us approaching. The road had been empty for a long time. Perhaps ours was the first vehicle he had seen. If he needed help, we might have been his only chance. My husband slowed down and carefully turned the car around as soon as we were facing the other direction. We drove back toward the place where we had seen him. Both of us searched the road ahead. I expected to see him standing in the middle of the lane, waving for us to stop. Part of me was afraid that we might hit him if he suddenly appeared in the headlights. But the road was empty. We continued toward the wooded area. The headlights moved across the trees, the roadside, and the narrow shoulders. We looked for any sign of movement. There was nothing. The man had disappeared. At first, we thought we had not yet reached the exact spot. The road was dark, and every turn looked similar. We drove more slowly, trying to recognize the section of forest he had run from. Then we saw the area. We were certain it was the same place. There was no one there. We looked along both sides of the road. We searched for a person crouching near the trees or lying on the ground. Nothing moved. We could not see clothing, a bag, a flashlight, or any other object that might have belonged to him. There was no parked vehicle nearby. There was no open gate or driveway. There was only the road and the forest. My husband slowed the car even more. We both stared into the darkness between the trees, but the headlights only reached a short distance. Beyond that, the forest was solid black. I remember feeling a strong reluctance to get out of the car. We had turned around because we thought the man might need help, but now that he was gone, the situation felt dangerous in a different way. If he had been running from someone, that person might still be nearby. If he had been mentally unstable, we did not know how he might react if we found him. If the whole thing was some kind of trap, stopping on an isolated road would put both of us at risk. We remained inside the car. We moved along the road slowly, still searching. I watched the tree line, expecting the man to step out again. I imagined seeing his pale body between the trunks or his face appearing suddenly near the passenger window. But he never returned. We drove slightly past the area, then slowed again. There was no trace of him. That was the part that disturbed me most. Only seconds had passed. He could not have traveled far, especially without clothing or shoes. The forest was thick, dark, and probably difficult to move through at night. Yet somehow he had vanished completely. Perhaps he had turned and run back into the trees as soon as he realized we were not stopping. That was the most reasonable explanation. Still, I kept wondering why. If he was trying to get help, why would he disappear before we returned? He could have stayed near the road. He could have continued waving. He could have waited in a place where we would see him. Instead, he was gone. We called out from inside the car, but there was no answer. The music had been turned down by then. Without it, the silence outside felt enormous. We could hear the engine, the tires against the road, and our own voices, but nothing from the woods. No shouting, no footsteps, no branches breaking, not even an animal moving through the brush. We discussed whether we should stop and search on foot, but neither of us thought it was safe. The road was too isolated, and we did not know what we were dealing with. My husband continued driving slowly while I watched through the windows. I wanted to see the man again because seeing him would have meant we could do something. We could speak to him, find out whether he was hurt, or contact the police. But there was no sign of him anywhere. Eventually, we had to continue our journey. As we drove away for the second time, I kept looking into the rearview mirror. The road behind us remained empty. The dark forest closed around it again, and within minutes, the place where we had seen him looked like every other section of road. My husband and I continued talking about what had happened. We tried to find a harmless explanation. Perhaps the man had been camping nearby and had taken drugs. Perhaps he had been swimming somewhere and had lost his clothes. Perhaps he had been part of some strange prank. Perhaps he lived in the area and was experiencing some kind of mental health crisis. Those explanations were possible, but none of them made me feel better. A person who was confused, intoxicated, or mentally unwell could still have been in danger. The image that stayed with me was not simply that he had been naked. It was his panic. There was something about the way he ran out of those trees that made me believe he was escaping from something. I cannot prove that. I did not see another person. I did not see an animal following him. I did not hear a gunshot, a scream, or any sound from the forest. All I saw was one terrified-looking man running toward the road and waving at our disappearing car. Still, I have never been able to forget him. For a long time afterward, I wondered whether we should have reacted faster. At the time, 20 seconds did not seem long. We had to understand what we had seen, decide what to do, slow down, and find a safe place to turn around. But when someone may be in danger, 20 seconds can matter. I often replay the moment in my mind and imagine what might have happened if we had stopped immediately. Would he have reached the car? Would he have explained why he was naked and alone in the forest? Would he have asked us to call the police? Would someone else have appeared behind him? Or would stopping have placed us in danger? There is no way to know. The logical part of me understands that we made a reasonable decision. We did turn around, we did go back, we searched the area from the road, but another part of me still feels guilty. I wonder whether the man saw our car continue into the darkness and believed we had chosen to leave him behind. I wonder whether he ran back into the forest because he thought no one was coming. I wonder whether he survived whatever had frightened him. The thought that troubles me most is that we may have witnessed the final moments of someone's life without realizing it. Perhaps he was being chased. Perhaps someone had attacked him and left him without clothes. Perhaps he had escaped from a house, a vehicle, or a campsite hidden beyond the trees. Perhaps he had been running through the forest for a long time and came across the road just as we passed. If any of that was true, our car might have been the only help he saw that night. Then again, it is possible that nothing terrible happened. Maybe he returned safely to a nearby camp. Maybe friends were waiting in the woods. Maybe he was intoxicated and had no memory of running into the road. Maybe there was a simple explanation that would make the entire event seem less disturbing. I hope that is true. But the way he looked has never allowed me to fully believe it. His movements were too desperate. He was not casually signaling for us to stop. He was throwing his arms into the air as though he needed us to notice him immediately. He seemed like someone who understood that once our car disappeared around the next turn, he would be alone again. We never learned who he was. We never heard anything later about a missing man in that exact area, although we did not know where to look or whether the event had ever been reported. There was no ending to the story. There was only that brief image in the mirror, the decision to turn around, and the empty road waiting for us when we returned. Years have passed, but I can still picture the scene clearly. The winding road, the complete darkness, the slow music playing inside the car, the black wall of forest on the left. Then a pale figure bursting out of the trees, running into the road and waving both arms as we drove away. Sometimes I think the lack of an answer is what makes the memory so frightening. Had we found him and discovered that he was drunk, lost, or playing some foolish joke, the event would have become a strange story we could laugh about later. Had we found evidence that he was injured, we could at least have called for help. Instead, we found nothing. He appeared for only a few seconds and then vanished into the darkness. I still think about him whenever I travel on an isolated road at night. I watch the trees more carefully, especially when there are no other cars around. I tell myself that if anything similar ever happens again, I will react faster. But I also remember how vulnerable we felt when we returned and saw that empty road. Two people alone at night, stopped beside a dark forest, searching for a stranger whose intentions we could not know. There may not have been a safe choice. We could only make the decision that seemed right in the moment. We turned around. He was gone. That is all I know for certain. I hope he was safe. I hope there was an ordinary explanation. I hope that after we left, he found his way back to wherever he had come from. But every time I remember the terror in his movements, I get the same awful feeling. I feel that he had been running from something or someone inside those woods. And I cannot stop wondering whether my husband and I unknowingly witnessed the last moments of a man who was never seen alive again. If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.